Hi guys, it's Mrs. Carey. I miss you so much. I just wanted to say hi. As you can tell, I'm recording this on St. Patrick's Day, so you will see it, well, a day later. But I'm all dressed for my St. Patrick's Day celebration here at my house. It is in the evening. As you can see from behind me, it's dark. But I just wanted to say hi and tell you how much I miss you. And I thought a great way for you guys to see me every day, although I can't see you, it's okay, would be for me maybe to read a little bit to you. So I was thinking about a book that we don't read in school, and that is, hold on, Holes. I don't know if that's the reverse of it, but that's Holes by Louis Sachar. It's a great book. I haven't read it in a long time, so I thought maybe it would be nice for me to read a few chapters to you every day. And then if we don't finish by the time we go back to school, we can read a little bit every day once we're back in the building. So I'm going to start by reading from the very beginning, and then we'll see how it goes. We also are going to start a book club, so you can pick a book of your choice, one that you have at home. Your parents don't have to go crazy to get you a new book. If it's something you already read, that's fine too. Just go ahead and read it, and then I will post questions every few days for you. And then I thought it would also be nice for us to put together a little book of all different, a booklet of all little books for you guys to see maybe some choices that you might want to share with each other. If you heard that, that was my kids running upstairs. They're not ready for bed yet. So anyway, let me start reading Holes to you. And if you've read this book already, it's okay. You just will have to listen and enjoy it, or you can just turn me off. It's totally up to you. Part 1. You are entering Camp Green Lake. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There once was a very large lake here, the largest lake in Texas. That was over 100 years ago. Now it's just a dry, flat wasteland. There used to be a town of Green Lake as well. The town shriveled and dried up along with the lake and the people who lived there. During the summer, the daytime temperature hovers around 95 degrees in the shade. If you can find any shade. There's not much shade in a big, dry lake. The only trees are 2 old oaks on the eastern edge of the lake. A hammock is stretched between the 2 trees, and a log cabin stands behind them. The campers are forbidden to lie in the hammock. It belongs to the warden. Vocab word if you don't know what warden is. The warden owns the shade. Out on the lake, rattlesnakes and scorpions find shade under rocks and in the holes dug by the campers. Here's a good rule to remember. About rattlesnakes and scorpions. If you don't bother them, they won't bother you, usually. Being bitten by a scorpion or even a rattlesnake is not the worst thing that can happen to you. You won't die, usually. Sometimes a camper will try to be bitten by a scorpion or even a rattlesnake. Then he will get to spend a day or 2 recovering in his tent instead of having to dig a hole out on the lake. But you don't want to be bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard. That's the worst thing that can happen to you. You will die a slow and painful death. Always. If you get bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard, you might as well go into the shade of the oak trees and lie in the hammock. There is nothing anyone can do anymore for you. So far, it's interesting to see what's going to happen next, because this right now is a little bit wacky. The reader is probably asking, which I just was, why would anyone go to Green Camp Lake? Most campers weren't given a choice. Green Camp Lake is a camp for bad boys. If you take a bad boy and make him dig a hole every day in the hot sun, it will turn him into a good boy. Boys and girls, did you know that? Because I really didn't. Stanley Yelnates was given a choice. The judge said, you may go to jail or you may go to Green Camp Lake. Stanley was from a poor family. He had never been to camp before. Stanley Yelnats was the only passenger on the bus, not counting the driver and the guard. The next guard sat next to the driver with his seat turned around facing Stanley. A rifle lay on his lap. Stanley was sitting about 10 rows back, handcuffed to the armrest. Okay, boys, girls, think about this. How bad of something did Stanley have to do that he would be handcuffed? I guess we're going to find out, but let's just keep reading, okay? His backpack lay on the seat next to him. It contained his toothbrush, toothpaste, and a box of stationery his mother had given him. He'd promised to write her at least once a week. He looked out of the window, although there wasn't much to see, mostly fields of hay and cotton. He was on a long bus ride to nowhere. The bus wasn't air-conditioned, and the hot, heavy air was almost as stifling as the handcuffs. Stanley and his parents had tried to pretend that he was just going to camp for a while, just like the rich kids do. When Stanley was younger, he used to play with his stuffed animals and pretend the animals were at camp. Camp fun and games, he called it. Sometimes he'd have them play soccer with a marble. Other times, they'd run an obstacle course or go bungee jumping off a table, tied to a broken rubber band. That's unusual, right, boys and girls? Anyway, now Stanley tried to pretend he was going to camp fun and games. Maybe he'd make some friends, he thought. At least he'd get to swim in the lake. Yeah, not really. He didn't have any friends at home. He was overweight, and the kids at his middle school often teased him about his size. Even his teachers sometimes made cruel comments without realizing it. On the last day of school, his math teacher, Mrs. Bell, taught ratios. As an example, she chose the heaviest kid in the class and the lightest kid in the class and had them weigh themselves. Stanley weighed 3 times as much as the other boy. Mrs. Bell wrote the ratio on the board, 3-1, unaware of how much embarrassment she had caused both of them. Stanley was arrested later that day. Ooh, I don't want to know. I kind of do want to know. He looked at the guard who sat slumped in his seat and wondered if he had fallen asleep. The guard was wearing sunglasses, so Stanley couldn't see his eyes. Stanley was not a bad kid. He was innocent of the crime for which he was convicted. He'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was all because of his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. He smiled. It was a family joke. Whenever anything went wrong, they always blamed Stanley's no-good, dirty, rotten, stealing great-great-grandfather. Okay, so that was a joke. Supposedly, he had a great-great-grandfather who had stolen a pig from a one-legged gypsy, and she put a curse on him with all his descendants. Stanley and his parents didn't believe the curse, of course, but whenever anything went wrong, it felt good to be able to blame someone. Things went wrong a lot. They always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked out the window at the vast emptiness. He watched the rise and fall of a telephone wire in the middle. In his mind, he could hear his father's gruff voice softly singing to him. If only the woodpecker sighs. The bark on the tree was just a little bit softer, while the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely. He cries to the moon, if only, if only. It was a song his father used to sing to him. The melody was sweet and sad, but Stanley's favorite part was when his father would howl the word moon, probably the way I did, right, boys and girls? The bus hit a small bump and the guard sat up, instantly alert. Stanley's father was an inventor. To be a successful inventor, you need 3 things: intelligence, perseverance, and just a little bit of luck. Stanley's father was smart and had a lot of perseverance. Once he started a project, he would work on it for years, often going days without sleep. He just never had any luck. Every time an experiment failed, Stanley could hear him cursing his dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. Stanley's father was also named Stanley. Just checking the pages here. Stanley's father was also named Stanley. Stanley's father's full name was Stanley Yelnats III. Our Stanley is Stanley Yelnats IV. Everyone in his family had always liked the fact that Stanley Yelnats was spelled the same frontward and backward. So it's Stanley, and then his last name, boys and girls, is Yelnats. So both ways it's Stanley. Isn't that interesting? That's kind of funny. So they kept naming their son Stanley. Stanley was an only child and was every other Stanley before him. All of them had something else in common. Despite their awful luck, they always remained hopeful. As Stanley's father liked to say, I learned from failure. Boys and girls, isn't that what we talk about in school? That you have to fail to learn, right? It's a growth mindset. But perhaps that was part of the curse as well. If Stanley and his father weren't always hopeful, then it wouldn't hurt so much every time their hopes were crushed. Not every Stanley Yelnats had been a failure. Stanley's mother often pointed out whenever Stanley or his father became so discouraged that they actually started to believe in the curse. The first Stanley Yelnats, Stanley's great-grandfather, had made a fortune in the stock market. He couldn't have been too unlucky. At such times, she neglected to mention the bad luck that befell the first Stanley. He lost his entire fortune when he was moving from New York to California. His stagecoach was robbed by the outlaw Kissin Kate Barlow. If it weren't for that, Stanley's family would now be living in a mansion on a beach in California. Instead, they were crammed in a tiny apartment that smelled of burning rubber and foot odor. Gross. If only. The apartment smelled the way it did because Stanley's father was trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. The first person who finds a use for old sneakers, he said, will be a very rich man. It was this latest project that led to Stanley's arrest. The bus ride became increasingly bumpy because the road was no longer paved. Actually, Stanley had been impressed when he first found out that his great-grandfather was robbed by Kissing Kate Barlow. True, he would have preferred living on the beach in California, but it was still kind of cool to have someone in your family robbed by a famous outlaw. Kate Barlow didn't actually kiss Stanley's great-grandfather. That would have been really cool, but she only kissed the man she killed. Instead, she robbed him and left him stranded in the middle of the desert. He was lucky to have survived, Stanley's mother was quick to point out. The bus was slowing down. The guard grunted as he stretched his arms. Welcome to Camp Green Lake, the driver said. Stanley looked out the dirty window. He couldn't see a lake, and hardly anything was green. Okay, boys and girls, we're going to stop there right before Chapter 4, Holes. We're going to keep reading it until we go back to school, and then even when we're at school. So remember, I'm wearing my St. Patrick's Day outfit because today that I'm reading this is St. Patrick's Day, but you will see it on the 18th. I miss you very much. I love you. I'll talk to you later. Keep up the good work, okay? You're doing awesome. Hang in there and be kind to your parents, please.